Project X, thank you for the super chat. He says, amplifier damping factor affect this too. I'm not sure exactly what he's speaking. Maybe he's talking about how fast we're talking about how fast and slow.
I think that's
he's referring to how well the amplifier can control the signal and prevent ringing. And the damping factor of the amplifier is orders of magnitude shorter and less audible than ringing in the time domain from a loudspeaker or a subwoofer or even the room itself. I mean, have you ever been in a room where the signal stopped and the suspended ceiling tiles wiggle around for half a second? I mean, that's an example of the room itself is ringing for 300, 400, 500, 600 milliseconds. So the damping factor of the amplifier, not relevant in this discussion because it's so much better than the loudspeakers in the room itself. That it's really a non-event.
Well, I've seen other subwoofer companies that have like servos and things like that, and I've always told people, if you have a good enough, powerful enough amplifier, it'll control the sub. It'll control the driver. It does everything it needs to do. So
it's also a combination of the motor and how strong the field strength is in the motor and how well it controls the voice coil motion and the weight of the moving mass of the driver. This the spiders and the cone and the surround and everything like that all factors into it. But again, it gets back to, can the subwoofer play that frequency? Yes. Well, it has adequate transient response. Again, we get back to what's the time domain behavior of the entire system, not just the driver, but the whole system.
All right. We have this one here. Thank you for the super chat, Victor. Opinion on one large ported sub versus two sealed.
Well, if you're looking at strictly at output, let's talk about in the same family of subs, maybe a PB2000 Pro and an SB2000 Pro. What's max output of the two at different frequencies? Well, from about 50 hertz on up, 50 to 100 hertz, are pretty darn close because we're just talking amp and woofer at that point. Once you get down around 40 hertz and deeper, the cabinet size really starts to matter. So we have a much bigger cabinet on the PB2000 Pro. So at 40 hertz, PB2000 Pro has roughly 1.5 times higher dynamic output. At 32 hertz, it has twice the dynamic output. At 25 hertz, it has 3 times the dynamic output. And at 20 hertz, 4 times the dynamic output. Wow. You would literally need 4 SB2000 Pros to match one PB2000 Pro in output only at 20 hertz. Now, if you said to me, Ed, would you take 4 SB2000 Pros or 1 PB2000 Pro? Well, 4 SBs hands down because they're equal at 20 and the SB is slaughtered everywhere else, right? And so you're getting way more output in the more common base ranges, and you're getting the benefit of multiple subs in the room from a modal distribution standpoint and everything like that. So we really got to look at what are the needs of the user in that size room. Can one sealed sub play loud enough to satisfy their playback level in that room? Or do they need 2 sealed subs? Or maybe do they need a ported sub? Maybe they're just limited to one subwoofer. A single sealed sub can't play loud enough for them. So they got to go for a ported sub because dynamic compression is a lot more egregious than differences in time domain behavior. So say you're overloading a small sealed sub that can't handle a big room and you're trying to play, the latest Avengers blockbuster movie at reference level. Well, it just can't play that loud in the 18 to 36 hertz octave, which is where all that LFE lives, right? Yeah. And a larger ported sub can play multiple times louder. So sometimes it makes sense to have a ported sub in your application if you're really looking at room filling, a big room, and dynamics are really important. But other times, the sealed subwoofer, I always like to say there's nothing a ported sub can do that a sealed sub can't do better, except for max output. I run sealed subs in my own reference system. Why? Because ultimately I get better time domain behavior and I have enough output in my system so it doesn't matter to me. I don't need ported subs in my system. I have enough sealed subs and I'm benefiting from the time domain behavior and I'm benefiting from taking better advantage of room gain. My subs are flat to 8 hertz in my reference theater because they're sealed, and I'm taking better advantage of room gain than a ported sub can. So there's really advantages to sealed subs in certain applications. I'm a big fan of them for that reason. So it's one of those things. We have a running joke in our own. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. In our own broadcast happy hour, we say, "Well, it depends."
It depends. Yeah.
Real quick. What do you think about people that want to throw in one of these into their home theater?
Wow. What a beauty that is. The PA style subwoofers have incredible, amazing output from about 35 hertz on up. That's what they're designed to do. Tons of slam and impact. That sub can probably play 140, 145 dB. It's not designed for a home theater. It's designed for stage use.
Yeah. I always say to keep them separate. Keep the pro audio stuff to the pro audio people. The home theater stuff just buy a home theater sub.
You can.
I want to mix it up. I want to put an old stroker in a box.
A stroker in a box.
I mean, how much output do you really need?
Well, funny thing,
in your own system. That's really the question that you need to answer.
Right. We had a little barbecue for Father's Day yesterday. Shout out to all dads. I don't know if you're a dad, Ed.
Yep, I am.
Okay, happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
And they're all going to this festival tomorrow or tonight or whatever, and they were watching some bass music, like DJ sets in there. And Joe and I had just done the Magic Beans on the system upstairs, and it has this 2 15-inch sealed subs, and they're like, "Where's the bass? I thought you just fixed this. Where's the bass?" And I turned up the volume. I'm like, "We got to turn up the volume." And they're like, "Well, can't you just turn up the bass?" I'm like, "Well, I don't want to just turn up the bass when the volume's at 30. And then they were just like, "Well, they're like, we don't hear any bass. We don't hear any." I'm like, "Okay, screw it." So I just went to the back of the sub and jacked the level all the way to plus. And they're like, "Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right."
That's all they wanted.
It's not accurate. It's not a good reproduction of the sound. But if it's loud, and if you've grown up with subs and car audio, and you got the slamming bass, that's what you like. If you're like going clubbing, I mean, let's face it, you go into a club, what's hammering you in the chest? The subs. Yeah, they're way louder than they should be, but that's what people like in clubs. So hey, that's where you find that Sterling and Vega.
I DJ, I produce electronic music, so I know
sure,
100%.
Of course.
Yeah. All right, so another super chat from Alex the Great. We want to hear from the man Ed. Price to performance considered, what sub from your lineup are you picking for a 14 by 10 room, 12-foot ceilings?
Now, see, that's a pretty small room from a cubic foot standpoint. Fairly tall ceilings, but that room, you're going to have quite a bit of room gain in that room, which is a natural augmentation of the deepest frequencies. When the room transitions from a modal to a pressure zone, the room won't support standing waves below a certain frequency. And when that happens, it starts augmenting the low end output of the subwoofer, we call that room gain. So in that size room, I would probably run a sealed sub and take advantage of the room gain so I could get extra deep extension. And then really the question is, how loud do you want to play the system? Yeah. And that in turn dictates what model or models we would recommend.
So
the 3000, the SB 3000s, I feel like they're such a sweet spot for everything. With the whole lineup. I mean, pretty much every sub that I've ever tried from you guys is excellent. I wouldn't say, "Oh, this one, stay away from this one." I haven't tried the super old stuff, but I have a PB 1000 Pro, have SB 3000. They have the 3000 Micro. They all have their certain.
Yeah, they're all designed for certain applications, certain niche. I would say in that size room, if you're going to play at a pretty loud level, movies, I'd throw a pair of SB 3000s in there. That would be really nice.
So this room is 10 by 14 with 8-foot ceiling, and I have a PB 1000 Pro in here. You're talking about two SP 3000s, man.
Yeah.
Damn, it's gonna be loud. It would shake the shit out of everything, bro.
Well, okay, if Chana, you went back and did that to the gain and cranked it up, but if it's
Okay. All right.
if it's level matched, if both of them are level matched, right, with the rest of the system, it's going to sound great. You're going to get the extra deep extension from room gain, and you're going to have adequate dynamic headroom to capture those loud passages when they occur,
Right.
without dynamic compression. That's the key.
Okay.
When you add sub in the system, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, you're over subbing the room. It's going to be too powerful." No, it's not. If it's level matched, it'll be exactly what it needs to be.
It'll have headroom too.
Yes, it will scale up and hit those loud peaks without compression, and that's what adds realism to the presentation. And then it steps back and does the subtle background stuff and supports the audio track and the speakers without drawing attention to itself. The biggest mistake somebody can make is to undersub the room and then turn up the gain to compensate for it, because the quiet, subtle bass is way too loud, and the really loud bass doesn't get loud enough because the subwoofer hits its compression limits. So what have you done? You've taken the dynamic range and you
Squashed it.
So
Yeah.
all the quiet bass is way too loud. All the loud bass doesn't get any louder. So it turns into this massive droning mess. And you've lost all the dynamic range of the soundtrack, and the presentation suffers. It sounds awful.
I like it.
Really,
I like you on here, Ed.
headroom. That's what you need in the system.
You're making a lot of sense. I love it. I love all the sense that you're making, because, you know, I went on a little bit of a rant about stuff that I hear out there. And so it's very refreshing to me to have you on here talking about stuff that makes sense. And actually, it's not just theory, but it's obvious that you've tried these things. And that's what I really like, is to hear somebody's real world experience. Like, we've taken the subs outside and we flip the switch, and you know, theory is sometimes it doesn't align all the time. So taking the time to put in the work, try things out, I really respect that. You know,
that's why I love Room EQ Wizard and having your own microphone. How many of us have seen the, you know, standing wave calculators, right? And say, okay, I'm going to have the standing wave right here in the room, and I'm going to avoid it. And how many times have we seen that doesn't align with reality when you actually take a frequency response measurement and say, well, that's not what the calculator says. Well, I'm like, well,
it takes 30 seconds. Just measure it.
Right.
30 seconds. They'll tell you right now where the knowledge.
Real world trumps theory every time, and that's why you learn the most when you actually break out the microphone and start measuring and listening.
I'm the guy who spends all night. I'll mess around with different random things all night, so that when I come on here, or if I make a video and I say something, I know from experience. You know, I don't just, and of course I read the books too, you know, kind of tie them together. But a lot of times it's just that little extra bit of knowledge, you know, personal experience.
It's fun when you experiment and you build up your knowledge base based on actual factual data, measurements, and observations.
So here's from one of our patrons. I don't want to just only do the super chats. I don't want you guys thinking you have to pay, you know, to have us put your stuff up, but it helps. It definitely helps. It shows up in a yellow color here. It kind of makes it obvious to us.
It helps.
But all right. So Paul, he says, at what frequency is the phase adjustment? What frequency, when you say
frequency dependent?
How does the sub know what the physical phase knob should be adjusting? See, Paul, I got you. I did some. I even translated for you there.
Well, it probably the easiest way to describe this one would be, let's say you set the phase control from to 30 degrees of phase delay, and the amplifier is actually implementing this phase change to the signal, and we say, what is 30 degrees of phase rotation at 80 hertz, and you can actually figure out what that is from a frequency and a wavelength standpoint. And then the rhetorical question is that the same as 30 degrees of phase rotation at 20 hertz or even 16 hertz? And the answer is no, because of the differences in the wavelengths of the frequencies. So that's really to me, the best way to describe it. So when you adjust phase delay on the amplifier and on the subwoofer, that phase delay is frequency dependent, and you're dialing in 15 or 30 degrees of phase rotation. That's not uniform across the entire bandwidth of the subwoofer.
I guess I'm not sure if this is what he meant, but is there a certain frequency that it centers around, or?
Yeah, typically,
Okay.
for years and years and years.
SBS.
It was 80 hertz forever.
Okay.
It's a little bit lower now. I think the center frequency of the phase control might be maybe closer to 60 hertz. I'd have to check it. But forever and ever, it was 80 hertz. That was the phase control. That was the center frequency of the phase control.
Okay. All right. So a few more here. So here's this bright yellow box here that's saying Project X, $10 super chat. Thank you. He says, I've noticed a difference in LFE output between two subs swapped in the same enclosure. Higher output at 20 hertz, older sub with FS of around 21 hertz versus the same model with stiffer suspension, FS of 35 hertz. The TS parameters, teal small parameters.
Yep.
So he's getting real advanced over here.
Well, basically, so you got the same size cabinet, and you have two woofers. One of them with a deeper FS, meaning that woofer wants to have more output or live at a deeper frequency, versus one with a higher resonance frequency. So you would see this revealed in the differences in the frequency responses as well. So you would sweep both subwoofers, and one of them would have the one with the FS of 35 hertz. That would have a peak around that frequency, depending on the box size. But that one would want to have more mid and upper bass output, simply because of the TS parameters and the way it's designed. The other one would have higher, deeper bass output, but possibly at the expense of mid and upper bass output. So it really depends on what the design goals are, how big the box is, whether it's sealed, whether it's ported, where you want the woofer to have the resonance frequency and more natural output. There's a lot that goes into it. You wouldn't want to have a woofer with a very lively and pronounced resonance frequency and hump in the frequency response that you would have to EQ out afterwards. So you want to sort of design the TS parameters of the woofer and the cabinet size and the cabinet, whether it's bass reflex or sealed, they're all interrelated with each other. So when you're doing the design phase and you're looking at your modeling and the TS parameters of the driver and say, all right, we want a decent sized sealed cabinet like the SB16 Ultra, and we design the TS parameters of that driver to live and have a decent looking frequency response in that size cabinet. Before we even start applying EQ to the system, we've already pre-designed that woofer to live in that size enclosure and behave the way we want it to.
I love how you describe the FS as where does a sub want to live.
It is. It's the freer resonance frequency of the driver. That's where it has the highest. You see it measure it in free air. Where does this subwoofer? Where does this driver want to have? Where does it want to live? Where does it want to have the most output?
That's great.
And that's the resonance frequency of that driver as a system, which are the teal small parameters.
I guess you have to be a super nerd to be like, oh, I see what you mean. That's where it just wants to hang out.
But the DIY guys, they get all that stuff. They've got all the modeling programs, and they can spec the woofer that they want for that particular application.
Well, okay. Hi Finest, thank you for the super chat. I have an open concept room with dual SB16s. I have the left sub in the corner, which has 6 dB room gain over the right sub, open to the kitchen. Is this the best positioning, or should I flank the TV?
And what it is, he's actually talking about boundary gain. That sub's just louder in that location of the room than the other sub. 6 dB literally is a doubling of the output. So one subwoofer is playing twice as loud as the other. if you want to level match them, which is what we do recommend, you've got to run 6 dB higher gain on the
other
one that's near the open area. And this just gets back to we normally start with a corner and work from there. But the one that's near the opening of the room with less boundary gain is going to be working a lot harder, which might not be a big deal unless you're pushing the entire system really loud. And then that sub, even though it's an SB16, it's going to hit its limits 6 dB sooner than the other one because you're running at 6 dB hotter. So that one could run into compression, dynamic compression artifacts earlier, and potentially have some issues. So I would say if there's a 6 dB delta in output between those two subs at the same gain setting, I would say look for a better location for that second subwoofer and get it away from that permanent opening.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Two more here. And I think that's it for right now. So Project X, thank you for the super chat again. He said, I heard Sirwin Vega. Thoughts? I know they're one of the few left who still produce old school format towers with large drivers. I wonder if they still have those red surrounds.
Yeah,
I think they do, actually.
You guys should do blue surrounds. That'll be your thing. Blue surround. Can you do it?
Yeah, we can do it. But, Sirwin Vega, they've been around forever. Their reputation back in the day was they could play loud and clean, and they could. And they're sort of an iconic brand. So I don't throw shade on any brands really.
No, how could you throw shade on Sirwin Vega?
You can't. Sirwin Vega is a cool brand. They're just not mainstream home theater, mainstream audio anymore. I'm just not seeing them for sale in the normal retail channels, at least that we live in. Like say, you're looking at what are the top brands like a B&W and Focal and Klipsch and Polk and SVS, but it's an iconic brand and they still perform really well.
Yeah, I think it's just the ownership changes hands, and then it's just a name sometimes. I don't know. I haven't reviewed any of the new stuff, but I would take an old Sirwin Vega stroker. I'm telling you, put it into like a home theater box and have like the only home theater stroker.
Plus the name, right? The name's awesome. It's boss. Sirwin Vega, just its power, right? Yeah, it's Sirwin Vega's vintage.
It just sounds great. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It's good stuff.
I'm blue surround. I'm telling you, that's a free one. Nick can write that one down. As long as the foam doesn't fall apart, you got to stick together. Got to use the new stuff. All right, so Juan, thank you for the super chat. This will be the last one, I think. He says, I had to disassemble the speaker to add custom vinyl wrap, and now I don't know which color wire set from the crossover corresponds to which driver.
Well, see, that's an interesting one because it's prime center. So, if you're looking at a 3-way crossover, the woofers, let's take a sub for an easier example. You say a subwoofer, what is absolute polarity in the driver? Well, you can take a 9-volt battery and touch it to the terminals, and if the woofer bumps out, that is the correct polarity, and say, and obviously you got to go positive to positive, negative to negative, and say, all right, well, now I know what's positive and what's negative. But if you look at the crossover network and you understand crossover design, there are phase rotations in the crossover network when you're high passing and low passing, going from the woofers to the mid-range to the tweeter. And it becomes a lot fuzzier and a lot more of a gray area. And you say, all right, is this actually positive and negative? And all of our speakers do have markings on them, and you should be able to determine what's positive and what's negative on each driver, because it should have a mark actually on the speaker tab.
I mean,
if you do that to the tweeter and it moves forward, then that's bad news.
And you would never do that, right? You only do that only do bump test on the woofer. Never bump test you could do it to a mid-range driver, maybe with 1.5 volt battery. But if you bump test a tweeter with 9 volts DC, you can probably kiss that tweeter goodbye. Yeah. That'll be the end of it.
So Juan, what I would do is I would just order another one from Amazon. open it up and be like, oh, these go here, those go there, pop it back in, return
And
it.
if he's a Prime Center owner, he can contact us in customer service,
Oh, there you go.
and we can tell him how the crossover network connects to the drivers if for some reason he took it apart.
Yeah, you guys have great customer service. And if you had REW and a U mic, you could probably see which way measures.
Oh yeah, of course. If you wired the mid range wrong, that would show up immediately in the frequency response. There would be a big suck out in the mid range.
All right, so that's pretty much it. Again, thank you, Project X, for the additional super chat. Let me see. What I think, you know what? Let me just say this one, just because Bodie is also a patron of ours. He says, Ed, my living room is 10 by 10 with a arch opening dead in the back and a doorway to the kitchen on the side. Where should I put my two SB 1000 Pros?
Put them in the corners, like we talked about earlier. I don't put them near permanent openings because you're going to get less boundary gain and less output from the system. Start with the corners so you can get good boundary gain and the highest standing wave density in the room, and go from there.
All right, everybody. We do the Daily HiFi podcast every Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So make sure you join up to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Daily HiFi, and we will see you there for the big show every Monday. Yeah.